began with a battle, was blessed by a Baptist minister, and these days takes a blaze of flames to finish and decades to perfect.
Well, bourbon is magic.
The first one really makes me want to have the second one real bad. I just love the way it tastes.
Now maybe you think you know all you need to know about bourbon.
You get to a certain age, at least men, you don't shop anymore. So I wanted to know what bourbon I wanted when I went to the liquor store.
But the more you know about what goes into it, the more you're gonna get out of it. It's about the subtle differences that make one bottle a perfect mixer and another worth a king's ransom.
As a millionaire, that's probably what you'd be drinking.
Is the secret in the water? Could it be in the barrel? We're gonna tell you where to find the white dog and what the angel's share should be, plus when it's okay to add ice. From the bottom of the barrel to the facts behind the bottle, we're gonna show you how to choose the best bourbon and how the best is done. So much bourbon, so little time. Let's get started. But wait a second, what is bourbon?
All bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon.
All whiskeys share the same 4 regulations. Whiskey is a spirit, it's distilled, crafted from grain. It is distilled below 190 proof. It is aged in an oak container, and it can be bottled at no less than 80 proof. Now, bourbon whiskey takes those 4 rules and really adds some teeth to them.
So here's what makes bourbon different from the other whiskeys. Number 1, bourbon is made with corn.
So you have the 51% corn minimum, and the second grain you have an option of using either wheat or rye. Also has to be aged at least 2 years in new charred oak barrels. Not a used barrel, but a new barrel.
We're the only whiskey in the world that doesn't allow for the addition of caramel coloring.
Bourbon has to be made in the United States. Now, it does not have to be made just in Kentucky. It can be made anywhere, but most of it is made in Kentucky today.
So that's the legal definition of America's native spirit. That's right. Congress declared it our official spirit in 1964. But it took a little bit of luck and a whole lot of magic to get to that point. And we promised you some fighting. So let's go back to bourbon's beginning. Farther. Farther. No, keep going. Okay, here we are. Way back when, whiskey was an important part of life on the farm. Good for whatever ails you. Not just a drink, but a frontier companion. Or maybe the antiseptic you used to swab out a scratch or a bullet hole. In 1794, a very young United States government levied a tax on distilled spirits. Frontier farmers used to converting their surplus grain into alcohol complained, and the people rose up. It began as a peaceful civil protest, but soon became an active resistance, including the tarring and feathering of at least one unfortunate tax collector. And eventually, it became an armed rebellion. The Whiskey Rebellion is generally considered to have been the first test of the fledgling country's new authority. Called upon to defend his shiny new Constitution, President George Washington sent in the militia. The handful of men arrested were later pardoned by Washington, who went on to become one of the biggest whiskey distillers in the country. By 1799, Washington's distillery was turning out some 11,000 gallons of whiskey per year. What the Whiskey Rebellion also did was drive some of the smaller distillers farther afield, out of the reach of the feds. The state of Kentucky offered settlers 400 acres of free land if they would build a cabin and grow some corn. And it worked.
We knew what to do with all the grain we had to grow to get the free land. And that was converted into something that was valuable and non-perishable, and that was whiskey.
In 1811, there were 2,000 farmers in Kentucky that were registered to have these 50-gallon or larger stills.
And here's where the magic began. It turned out that there was, well, something in the water.
Well, let me tell you what the magic is. It's where the limestone from the east meets the soil from the west that has no ferrous oxide in it.
It makes for for good bourbon.
which is the reason the distilleries are so close together.
You can get the corn from anywhere. You can get the wheat from anywhere. It's our limestone water that really makes the bourbon. It's high in calcium, low in iron. So that's why we have great racehorses and great bourbon.
But the whiskey hadn't become bourbon quite yet. It needed a little help. Let's just call it divine intervention.
Elijah Craig was a Baptist minister.
He was making whiskey, and at this point he ended up putting it in barrels that were charred.
Originally these barrels were fish barrels, so they burned them to get the fish smell and all that out.
You filled it up with straw and you set fire to it. And this killed any bacteria, sanitized the barrel so you could use it for something else. So a charred barrel was not unusual, but putting the whiskey in a charred barrel is what made the difference in the taste.
The big market was New Orleans, which took about 3 months to get to on a flatbed barge.
And so they put the bourbon in thinking that when they got to New Orleans it was going to be a clear product just like it was when they put in.
And while it was in that barrel, it took on this great flavor.
During the time spent in the charred oak barrels, the whiskey turned red and flavorful.
They sent a message back and said, "What is this red liquid you sent us?" And then the next thing you know, people started to like it because of the flavor.
And they referred to it as, "Have you got any of that whiskey from Bourbon?" Meaning Bourbon County.
So there you have it. Elijah Craig puts whiskey in a dirty old barrel from Bourbon County, Kentucky, and America's native spirit is born.